Hey everybody, and welcome back to Ready Steady Play. This is the setup and rules video for Villagers, which is the second game from Sinister Fish Games. The game is designed by Hakon Hoel Gardner, and it is a card drafting, tableau building, hand management game in which you are collecting villagers and trying to earn gold. You will also have to create food and have people to build buildings, which essentially means adding things to your tableau. The game is for 1 to 5 players, and it's pretty quick to play. It's about half an hour to an hour to play. So you may have backed this on Kickstarter. This is the Kickstarter edition. So what I'll do first is I'll show you what's in the box, then I'll show you how to set up your game, and then I'll explain the rules of how to play. It's actually, it's a very, very fast game. There are some nuances though, so you will have to learn those before you can play. But that's what I'm here for. As usual, all of the sections are included in the description below. So if there's something specific that you're looking for, you need a refresher on, please do drop down to the bottom and find those sections there so you can jump straight to what you need. Without further ado, let's open up the box and see what's inside. As you can see here, I've already opened up my box, so everything's kind of nicely laid out. You can see there's card dividers here as well, dividing up all the different sections of cards that come with the game. I've actually got some punchboard coins here as well that you can see on the outside, but this is the Kickstarter edition, the deluxe one, and it actually came with this beautiful box of wooden monies. So I haven't punched any of the paper ones. What I will say is that the actual game, when it first came, packaged, all the cards were together, and so it was very easy to just get all the components out and start playing right away. Everything was together and organized in such a way that all the cards you needed to be in one place were in one place. So big props to Sinister Fish from that. That was very well done. So this is the Kickstarter version, which means that it comes with this little Kickstarter expansion, which has 3 modules you can add to the game. It's also got this box of wooden money, and then you've got all of the cards that come with the game that are required to play. As you can see here, I've already set this up into sections here. And so what I'll do now is I'll just show you what all these different sections are. Got a big old section stack of cards here. Now in here I've just slipped in the rule book there. And this punch board along the back here is just all the money. But again, I haven't taken that out. Here's the rule book for the expansions, but I'll talk you through those at the end of the video. And we've got the wooden money there as well. So the meat of the game really is in these cards here. And at the back, I've got the road setup, but the road forms the main marketplace of the game, and these are just the cards you need to fundamentally set that up. And on the back of each of these player dividers, you'll see a list of everything that you should find in this section as well. And then you've got everything the players will need to play the game, and this includes some player aids. You've got the founders cards. These are your starting cards here. These little village square markers as well. These are great. They're double-sided, so they've got a little turn sequence reminder on the back if you need that. Then we've got the basic villagers here, and there's a lumberjack, there's a hayer, and there's a miner, and then you've also got the basic villagers divider here for these 3 types of villagers. And what's cool about these is they're actually double-sided. So basically there's 2 kinds of art, and you can decide how you want this particular person to look within your village. And it's just nice because there's some options there as well, and they're quite distinct. So that's really nice that that's been included. And then you've got 80 villager cards, and these are the sort of the meat of the game here. These are the cards you're going to be drafting, the cards you're going to be building. And there's a big old deck of these here that you will be going through. And I'll show you how these work. And then we've got these 4-player suits here. So we've got wool and we've got to the tanner. So this is the wool deck and the leather deck here. And if you're playing with 4 or more players, you will shuffle these suits. You can see they've got a little 4+ stone here on the corner into the deck here, but we keep them separate because you don't use them in a 2 and 3 player game, or a 1-player game for that matter. Then we've got the Countess cards here. These also come in the core set. These are 26 cards that are used to play the single player version of the game. And then this is the stuff from the Kickstarter expansion. You've got the developments module. These add victory conditions that are triggered each round to give you extra points. Then we've got the Profiteers, and these are cards that are shuffled into the starting deck of the game. Then we've got these Saints, which are special sort of unique ability cards that are given out to every player at the start. And Scoundrels as well, which are the same thing. Special unique ability cards that are given to each player at the start of the game. If you've got the expansions, you'll also have these nice wooden tokens. So this is a rooster token that's a replacement for the first player card. So you don't need this anymore because now you've got this nice rooster token. And if you're playing with developments, you've got 3 cards that use these 3 symbols along the top here. These wooden tokens represent those 3 symbols and are used with the development expansion play. If you're not playing with developments, you don't need these. So now that we've seen what's in the box, let's have a look at how to set up the game. The first thing we'll do is take our road setup pack, set out these cards on the table in their starting positions. So most of the game is drafted from an area called the road, which you'll set up with these cards from the road setup. In this section, you should have 6 starting villagers, and these villagers can be found by the identification, which is this little road sign here in the bottom right-hand corner. These will tell you which 6 you're supposed to start with, and so you can always find them in the deck at the end of the game. You lay these out just next to each other to form a line of 6 cards. And then you've got your first and second market cards. These are scoring rounds. What we're going to do is we're going to put the first market above the second villager on the road here. Now the order of these villagers is random. It doesn't matter which order you put them in because they're forming a marketplace that will be drafted from anyway. The order of these cards on the top, though, is important, so make sure you put the first market above the second villager and the second market above the 6th villager. When the second market phase happens, this will trigger the game end. And then here we've got a first player marker card, and we've got just a little player aid reminder of what happens at the end of the draft phase. The next thing we'll do is we'll populate our town with villagers. We've got a big old deck of villagers here, and we're going to put these out in the town. So you'll take your deck of all your villagers here. Now, if you were playing with the Profiteers mini expansion from the expansion set, you would shuffle them into this deck at this point. But if you're not, then don't worry about it and just crack on. So you just give this deck of 80 villagers cards a shuffle. And then what you're going to do is you're going to deal 6 piles of cards along the top here. And we're going to put out 2 cards per player in the game. So I'm going to set up a 3-player game here, but there are some differences that I'll talk about later. These don't affect setup. So in a 3-player game, it would be 6 cards per pile. So I'll just do that very quickly. The remainder deck of cards here will just go to the next to the road in this position, where it forms a reserve bank of cards. Because I'm setting up a 3-player game, I'm using 5 different kinds of cards in this deck. We've got hay and grains, we've also got wood, ore, and solitary. But if I was playing with 4 or more players, I would also be using these 2 suits here, the wool and the leather that we looked at earlier. And these would have been shuffled into the reserve deck before these top decks were dealt out. So just make sure you shuffle those in if you're playing with 4 or more players. And the next thing we're going to look at are the basic villagers, which are very simple to set up. We're just going to take 3 piles of our basic villagers here. So we've got the hayer, the lumberjack, and the miner, and what we're going to do is we're just going to put them out into 3 piles which are easily accessible to all the players. And next we're going to look at player setup. So each player is going to have a village square tile, and these are used for both drafting and building, and they're used really to just keep track of cards and help you to make sure you're following the rules correctly. The side that you use doesn't matter. This one just has a pretty picture on it, whereas the other side has a little player aid for the turn sequence to help you remember. So each player gets 1, and I'm playing a 3-player game, so I'll put out 3 and the rest back in the box. We've got player aids. The back is Padlocks Explained, and the front is just how gold works, and keyrings as well. Gold and keyrings are really important, but you won't need these because I'm going to explain everything in this video. 1 for each player. Finally, we've got the founders. There are 5 of these cards, 1 for each potential player in the game, and there is different artwork on all of them, but they are all functionally the same. So just give 1 to each player and let them pick if they want, or whatever. It doesn't really matter who gets what. There we go. So now each player has a village board, a player aid, and a founder. They can just put these out in their play spaces wherever suits them. You're going to be building quite large tableaus, so you do need to make sure you have enough room. This table I'm demonstrating on here actually isn't really big enough for this game. Voila. So the final thing you're going to do as part of setup is deal everybody 5 cards from the deck. Boom. The last thing we're going to do after everybody's been dealt 5 cards is give everybody 8 coins. I've magically made money appear on the table, and now everyone's got 8 coins. The treasure chest here has many higher denominations in it, which you will absolutely need as you progress the game, because players are going to need way more than this. It's got a nice little magnet too. And now you're ready to start playing. But let me show you how to set up the mini expansions just in case you decide to use those. So if we're going to insert the developments expansion into our setup, what we're going to do is we're going to take each of these 3 piles of cards. So we've got the mercantile, the technology cards, and the community cards. We're going to give each of them a shuffle. Then we're going to deal 1 card face up from each pile somewhere onto the table. Here next to our reserve, where everyone can see, is a good spot. So I've put out the bank, the town hall, and the ox crane. I'm also going to take my wooden markers here and put them next to the card that matches their symbol. The rest of the development cards can go back in the box because we won't need them this game. Now I mentioned previously that our Profiteers should have been shuffled into this deck before these stacks were dealt and before the hands were dealt, so that's when we would have done the Profiteers. They're just additional villagers for the game. Now our Scoundrels, we're going to deal 1 of these to each player's hand. Scoundrels are basically just mean cards to start with, and they give you different abilities during the course of the game to sort of affect gameplay, and they add a bit more player interaction to the game. If you're playing with 2 or 3 players, remove the sheriffs and the thieves, because they're not used in a 2 or 3 player game. Then each player is dealt 1 of the remaining Scoundrel cards to have in their hand, in addition to the 5 that have already been dealt. Saints work the exact same way, except instead of being negative to other players, they're beneficial to you. And each player gets to start with a saint in their hand as well. So just deal each player a saint to their hand at the start of the game. So they'll have 7 cards in total. A scoundrel, a saint, and their 5 starting cards. All of these little expansion packs are modules, so you can use any one of them, or all of them, or none of them. It's entirely up to you. So you could play with the Scoundrels only, or the Scoundrels and the Saints, or you can play with just the developments if you prefer. It's up to you what you want to incorporate into your game. I'll go through the expansion packs at the end of the gameplay video, so we'll take them out for now. So now that we're all set up to play, let's look at how we play. So you're all set up and you're ready to play Villagers. It takes place over a series of turns. When all of these cards on the road here are exhausted, the game will end. And we will have been spending the game drafting these villagers here into our hands and then giving them jobs in our villages. They'll be allowing us to draft more cards and place more cards down, so we'll be able to build more as the game progresses, ultimately trying to get these gold symbols, and it's the player with the most gold in the end who's the winner. So you will be able to spend some gold over the course of the game, but because it's also the victory points, you kind of don't want to, but you're going to have to probably. So whoever has the most gold at the end is the winner. In the case of a tie, whoever has the fewest villagers in their village is the winner. So I'm going to explain how you get gold and how you get villagers in your village so that you can get gold, so that you can win. So the very first thing you want to do is decide who's going to be the first player. And our first players, well, according to the rules, the first player is the person who's lived in the same place the longest. But really, you can use any method to assign the first player card to whoever you want, based on whatever's acceptable to your group. I'm just going to give it to this player here on my left. And I'm using the rooster token there that comes with the expansion content. But you can use this first player card as well. And it's important to have the token or the card out because the first player will rotate. Each player's got their hand of 5 cards, and the game takes place over a series of rounds. And in each round, there's going to be a drafting phase to start, where players take turns drafting 1 card at a time from the marketplace here. Then there's going to be a marketplace update, where these cards are changed out for new cards. Some cards will remain, other cards will not, depending on what's happened in the drafting phase. After that, there's going to be a building phase, where we take our hand of cards that we've drafted up and whatever we've had from previous rounds, and we're going to decide which cards we're actually going to put down into our village tableau here in order to score points. At the end of the build phase, if a market's been triggered, there'll be a market phase. More on that later. And if there hasn't, we'll just go straight back to the drafting phase. The game will end if the second market phase is triggered, and then we'll total up final scoring and see who the winner is. So we have these 5 suits of cards in the 3-player game here. Remembering there'd be 2 more suits in the 4 or 5 player game. We've got the hay suit, the grains suit, the ore suit, the wood suit, and the solitary suit. And you can see all of these are also clearly identified by the matching symbols on the backs of the cards. Now, typically, you should be able to get sets of cards within suits that kind of power up as you get them, and they'll stack on top of each other in your village, replacing one another and getting exponentially more powerful. But you can always build the solitary cards on their own for an immediate bonus, and each step along the path is going to help you improve as you go. So each turn is divided up into these 2 fundamental steps, the drafting phase and the building phase. I'll explain the basic concepts of those first, and then we'll look in more detail at how the cards score you points, and also this intricate system called the Padlock system, which is going to influence which cards you want to take and what kind of decisions you're going to make. So let's have a look first at the drafting phase. So in the drafting phase, you'll draft between 2 and 5 cards. Everyone must draft 2 cards. If you are able to draft more than that, you must draft the maximum number you are able to draft. You unlock more drafting opportunities by getting this red symbol here on villagers in your village. This is food. If I were to put this harvester down in my village, there's an additional food symbol here. In a village with just 1 food symbol, I can now draft 3 cards in the drafting phase. So we'll start to the player on my left who has the cock, and they're going to take the blacksmith. They'll put it here on their village square. And the reason they place it here is so that we can see they've recruited 1 card, which will help us track what's going on. The card is then replaced from the leftmost deck of the cards here on the road with this grazier. Now it's over to the player on my right here, and they're going to take the poulterer, who is again replaced from the leftmost deck. Finally, the player in the middle here takes the harvester, who's then replaced. Everyone's got 1 card, but you must draft a minimum of 2, and it doesn't matter whether you have enough food or not. Note that we all start with no food. So the player to my left here decides they don't really want any of these cards here. They can also blind draft from any of these decks up here. So they decide to take this card here and put it in their village square. Now it's back to the player on my right, and so on. Once everybody's completed their drafting, then we update the road. Now this works slightly differently in a 2-player game as it does to a game with 3 or more players. So I'll show you the 3 or more players version first, and then I'll show you the 2-player version. In the 3 or more player version, we simply take a coin, put it on each of the cards left on the road. Note that on the first round, that just means 1 coin will go onto each card. However, in subsequent rounds, you might find some of these cards have been drafted. When any of these cards is picked up in a draft phase, the coins on top go to the player that drafted the card. If at the end of a draft round, during the update phase, some cards remain with coins on, those cards are discarded to a discard pile. If any cards are discarded during the update phase, you will then replenish them with cards from the reserve. Note that this comes from the reserve and not from the road. Then you'll put a coin down on each card. Now that is the end of the update phase. It's very simple. In summary, discard a card with a coin on, replace it with cards from the reserve. Once 6 cards are in the row with no coins on, put a coin on every card. In the game with 3 or more players, you will never have a card on the road with more than 1 coin on. But let's look at the way the 2-player version works, because the 2-player version works a bit differently. Let's ignore cock player here for a minute and imagine we're just playing with the middle player and the player on the right. Each player will be given 1 coin in the beginning of the update phase. They will pick a card to put the coin down upon. Imagine these are cards that they want to keep available in the game. The remaining cards will be discarded and replaced with cards from the reserve. Then play will continue as normal. There are a few points to note here. When our two players are playing their coins, they can both choose to play no coins, in which all 6 cards will be discarded and replaced. They can also choose to both place the same coins on the same card. Then 5 cards will be replaced. If coins remain from a previous round, unlike in the 3, 4, and 5 player game, they could receive further coins and double down on those cards. Or maybe someone picks a new card, in which case the 3 cards with no coins are replaced. So it works a little differently in a 2-player game. So once the road has been updated, we move on to the build phase. In the build phase, players will pick up all of the cards on their village square and add them to their hand. Now in the build phase, you can build up to 5 buildings. You may build 2 without any additional symbols, and if you want to build between 3 and 5, you must have additional build symbols. The build symbols look like these little black houses here. You can only utilize the build symbols and the food symbols if these cards are already built in your village. So on the first round, you'll only ever be able to build 2 buildings. So starting with the first player, in this case it's our cock player here, they will pick 2 cards from their hand and put them down here on their village tile. These will be the cards that they build this round. Once all the cards are down on their village, you will then place them into your village. And it's quite important to do this step because it helps you make sure that you've built the right number of cards. Once you start placing cards in your village, it can be quite difficult to track what you've put down and where because these villages are going to get a lot bigger. In order to understand building, we're going to have to understand this little track here. Now this is a wood suit card, and it's got a little 1 card symbol here, and it's got this track here. If we have a look at the Graper, they have a little 2 card symbol up here, but no track along the top. What this means is that the Wheeler is built upon a lumberjack and can be upgraded to a cartwright later. This card here means that you can only place 1 card upon a Wheeler. Now, we know that the Wheeler only upgrades to the cartwright, which means that you can only place the cartwright on top of the Wheeler and nothing else. However, some cards have these little 2 symbols here. And because there's no track of what the Graper becomes, that means there are many options the Graper can become, and you can have up to 2 cards on the Graper at any given time. I'll give a demonstration of this in just a minute, but what you will notice is the Graper is very similar to these basic workers here, like the Hare for our hay suit and the Lumberjack for our wood suit. The difference is the Graper doesn't come from the basic suit sets here. The Graper is actually part of the villager deck. And the reason for this is that the Graper is better than a basic villager because she provides food. But she's still required if you want to build more advanced grape suit cards. We are able to place the Graper straight into our village, and we know this in 2 ways. We know this because there's no chain along the top here, and we also know this because she has a banner under the suit symbol here. The Wheeler doesn't have a banner, which means we have to do something before we can build her. So we'll just take the Graper and put her down in our card tableau. The Wheeler, on the other hand, must be built upon a lumberjack, so before we can build the Wheeler, we have to acquire a lumberjack. During the build phase, in addition to the 2 to 5 cards that you build from your hand, you can also hire up to 3 of these basic villagers here. That is the Miner, Lumberjack, and Hare. In order to hire one of these villagers, you'll have to take your hand of cards here, and you'll have to pick one of them and put them face down on one of these decks here. And this is always a tough decision because you don't really want to get rid of these cards, so you've really got to decide. And you probably don't want to get rid of one of the ones you just picked up either. So after you finally make a decision, you take that card and you put it down on one of these piles here, knowing that it's not going to come back out for a while potentially. If you want it again immediately, you should put it down here. But the player on my left here is quite happy to bury the card up there. Now they can take a basic villager, and this villager will go straight into their village. They do not count towards the build limit. They're part of this extra limit of 3 basic villagers per turn. So now that they're in the village, we can take the Wheeler and build them on the Lumberjack. And we'll just put the Wheeler down like this. Note that when we build upon a card, we pretty much cover everything below the suit symbol and the top banner. So the name of the card and all the symbols underneath are covered. When a card is covered up like this, then all of the symbols on that card are completely removed. So it no longer has an effect. and you only pay attention to the effects of the card on the top of the stack. You'll remember from our earlier examination here that the lumberjack has 2 of these card symbols in the top right, and the wheeler only has 1. Now if we take a look at the carpenter card here, we can see that the carpenter is also built upon the lumberjack, but has no additional advancement of possibilities. That means that once the carpenter's there, nothing will be built upon them, and this is the best they're going to get. If you were to buy a carpenter, you could put it down here like this. And the reason you can have 2 cards on top of the lumberjack like that is because it's got this 2 card symbol here. The wheeler can never have that. The wheeler's only got a 1 card symbol. So the only card that can go on top of the wheeler is the cartwright, and they'll be placed directly on top of the wheeler, replacing it. You may have noticed this weird keyring symbol here on the carpenter. I'll explain that in just a minute when I explain padlocks, like this one on the Cooper. Once our player on the left here is done building, play will move to the player on my right, and then the player in the middle. Once they've all built their 2 cards, 3, 4, 5 cards, then the cock will pass to the next player in clockwise order, and then your round will begin. Your founders have 2 purposes. In addition to providing the basic villager set for the grains suit, and it should be noticed that there are no basic grain villagers in the whole deck. Every grains card that you find is an upgrade for the founders. Just like the lumberjack, they can have 2 cards upon them. But the founders have a special property down here that is unique to them, and then no other card has it. If at the end of any turn you don't have any food symbols in your village, you flip them over, and then they become food people. However, just like any card in your village, if you build a card on top of them, it replaces all of the symbols on them, so they will no longer produce anything, whether they're on their food side or their gold side. But if they are on their food side, you can never flip them back. They'll be on their food side forever. Fortunately, all of our players here have a food symbol in their village, so none of them have to flip their founders. Now that the player on the right here has got the cock, it's ready to start a new round, which begins in exactly the same way. I would advise you at this point that although gold, these gold symbols here, are the primary way in which the game is won, and acquiring money is the way in which you win the game, at these early stages, you should really focus on acquiring these red food symbols and these black building symbols. These are really, really important. Being able to recruit 5 and build up to 5 in the early game, or as early as possible, is very important to being successful at this game. You can always focus on getting some money later on. So in a nutshell, here's the way the padlock system works. Some of the cards you want to build are padlocked, and you'll have to pay someone to unlock them. And what I guess this means is that whatever profession they are, it requires someone of another profession to support them. Our player in the middle here has already built a seeker on their miner. Now, as we can see here, the seeker can progress 2 more steps into a spelunker and then a jeweler. If we take a look at the spelunker card here, we can see that it is padlocked. There's a padlock in the upper left-hand corner, which is brown. There's also an indicator in the middle that says Chandler, 2 coins. Now, here's the Chandler card here. And the Chandler has this keyring symbol on him. The keyring symbol means that there are 4 cards that he unlocks, and the little 2 gold means that he makes 2 gold for each card he unlocks. And I'll explain how this works in just a moment, but what's key to note is that this 4 can change depending on the card. For example, the Carpenter unlocks 8 cards. It's always 2 coins though. So, let's look at an example. Our middle player here has put the Splunker down into their build queue here in the build step. And when they get to putting their Splunker down onto their Seeker, they're going to have to find whoever has the Chandler and pay them 2 coins. Now in this case, it's the player to the right there with the cock. So, player in the middle here is going to take 2 coins and put them down onto the Chandler. Now this has 2 effects that I'll explain later, but the point is, this money will basically sit there and provide points for that player during the market phases of the game. So once here, and once again at endgame scoring. And there are also other things that can trigger off of this. Some cards score points based on the number of coins you have on cards like that within your village. Now, if the Chandler had belonged to the middle player already, then the middle player would actually take 2 coins from the bank and put them onto the chandler. This means that it is way better to build cards that are unlocked by cards in your village. It's like a little economy. This brings money into your village. So you're gaining 2 extra points instead of giving 2 points away. If nobody has a chandler, then the middle player will pay 2 coins to the bank. But if our player on the right here has a chandler, they must play the player on the right. They cannot choose to pay the bank instead. If the player on the left also has a chandler, then the player in the middle decides who to pay the money to. Now you'll note that the padlock symbol is in this top bar, and that means that when it's covered up by another card, in this case it would be the jeweler, the padlock symbol remains. That's because these symbols can all be used for scoring by other cards later, so it's important they remain visible, and the padlocks are included. And you'll see that the jeweler is also locked and unlocked by the blacksmith. You can tell the suit of the card that unlocks it by the color of the padlock. And so that's the padlock system. There are lots of cards that are locked, and they're all unlocked by other cards, and it's a very thematic connection. For example, the Splunker being unlocked by the Chandler, and the Jeweler being unlocked by the Blacksmith. You'll find also that, for example, the Fisherman is unlocked by the Shipwright. Remember, you don't have to have the card that unlocks the card available in the village. So, in fact, if you don't have the card, it's better for you that no one has it. The worst case scenario is that one of the other players has that card. And it's cool to look for combos that allow you to put money on your own cards, because then you're bringing in more points. Before I move on to the market phase and scoring, let's just talk about these red special cards. Red special suit cards are hired just like any other card from the road, placed onto your village square, and then brought into your hand. Once they're in your hand, they have various different effects. One of the key things to look out for here is this little red X symbol here. This means that after the card is played, it is discarded. Other cards in the special suit have this symbol here, which means they may have 2 or 1 card above them, although you won't be able to control it. The tinner here will unlock any padlocks on any villagers played with her for free. What this means is, for example, if you play her with your Spelunker, you do not have to pay any money to the Chandler at all. This is useful in every scenario where you don't own the Chandler. And this is all of the cards she's played with. So you would play her in one build phase, and all of the padlocks built in that build phase would be unlocked for free. You really want to play her with a bunch of padlock cards where you don't control the unlocking card to get the most out of her. The monk just takes the form of one villager in a production chain. So if you're missing the Splunker and you need to get from the Seeker to the Jeweler, you can use the monk as a stand-in for the Splunker. Note that he cannot become the Jeweler. He cannot be the top card in the chain. He can only become one of the middle parts of the chain. The Smuggler, you'll notice, is locked by the Shipwright as well. And the Smuggler will earn you gold based on one of the other villagers in your village. The Apprentice is very similar to the monk, except that he'll go along to someone else's village and just replace their Splunker, and then allow you to take the Splunker into your hand. Which is kind of useful. It allows you to get a card that you need. Note that this doesn't sabotage your opponent in any way, because he cannot become the top card of the stack. So let's talk about the market phase. It's super easy. Once these piles are gone, a market phase will be triggered, and you'll bring this card up like this, and it will trigger a market phase at the end of this round's build phase. Note that during the build phase, you cannot put cards on top of it or to the left of it. You can only place cards on an existing face-down pile. And you can see on the market that it's got this little gold symbol and this little brown symbol here. And what this means is you're going to score all the points in your village with gold and brown symbols. So here we've got the left player's village, and we can see from the left player's village here that they've got 8 gold coins. So what we'll do is we'll score them 8 money. Then we also score coins on cards. That means this money here. So they've got a Chandler with 2 coins, so they score another 2 gold coins. These come from the bank and are placed here into their stash. If there had been more here, then they could have more. And that's it for the first market phase, all your gold plus the coins on your card. The second market phase is a little bit different. It still scores your gold and the coins on your card, but it also scores these silver coins. Note that the gold and copper are performed in exactly the same way we just observed, except that in this case you can just take this money and add it to your pool because you won't need to keep track of it anymore. What you will need to keep track of is these silver coins. And these are endgame scoring conditions, so you'll need to build these villagers in your village during the course of the game. During the final scoring, these silver coins will be scored. What this means is that they're not scored in the first market phase or at any other time, and they all have different conditions. For example, the wood carver here is going to give you an additional gold for each gold on one of your wood suit cards. In this case, we'll get 3 because we only have the wheeler. If we had also managed to build a cooper, then he would give us 7. The peddler gives us 3 coins for every 2 gold symbols in our village. So in this case, we have 3 symbols, which is only 1 set, so we'd get 3 coins. If we'd built the cooper, like we looked at earlier, we'd get 6 coins. Finally, the priest here is going to score us 3 coins for every 2 hat suit symbols in our village. In this case, we've got 3 hats, so we're going to get 3 coins. If we'd managed to build just 1 more solitary card, then we'd get 6 coins instead. The grocer is another example of an endgame scoring card, and he's going to give us 3 coins for each food symbol in our village. In this case, just 1. So that's 3. And that's how endgame scoring works. Just simply gold, then silver, then the coppers just moving from your cards into your pool. And you're good. And then after everybody's scored their endgame, whoever has the most coins is the winner. Before I go, I'll just explain those expansions in a little bit more detail. So remember during setup, we set out 3 cards for the development expansion. These are essentially victory conditions, so let's have a look at the 3 we set up at the beginning. So there are variations for these, but here's the ox crane. So at the end of the build phase, a development card will award its boon to the player that meets its condition. For example, so at the end of the first build phase, we'll have a look and see who has the most hay symbols in their village. Now, the hay symbols are the symbols belonging to cards of the hay suit. And if you have the most hay symbols, you'll be awarded this little windmill technology token, and that will go and sit in your village. And so long as it's there, at the end of every build phase, you'll gain 2 coins, and you'll have an extra build symbol. Town Hall is awarded to the player with the most gold symbols in their village. Now remember, the gold symbols are the ones like this, so it doesn't matter what the number in the middle is, it's just counting up the number of cards with this symbol on them. If you're successfully awarded the Town Hall token, you'll gain 5 coins. As long as you have this at the end of every build phase, i.e. no one contests this, you'll get 5 additional coins. Finally, we've got the mercantile one here. This is the market card, basically, and it's the same kind of thing. The most villagers with coins on them. If you've got a chandler with coins on, that's 1. For every villager you have like this with 1 coin on them, you're going to be a contender for the bank. And if you have the bank symbol at the end of the build phase, which is this mercantile hut here, or tent, merchant tent here, then you'll gain 5 gold pieces. So that's very good as well. So if you can hold on to all 3, you're standing to make a lot of money. But remember, there is a set of each of these, and it's randomly determined. So you never know which of these cards is going to come out at the beginning of the game to influence these objectives. You only get it if you're a winner, not if you're tied. So then we've got these profiteering cards, and these actually shake the game up quite a lot, so let's look at them in a bit more detail. The Profiteers. These are extra cards that are added to the village deck at the beginning of the game. And you'll notice that most of them have this funny symbol here on them, with the exception of the Wholesaler, who's just another endgame scoring card. And you can tell where they go because they've all got this little money bag symbol on them. This is the symbol I want to talk about, this little rotating bronze symbol. Essentially what this means is that you're going to gain additional money at the end of each build phase, which can be really potent. So, for example, the captain is going to give you 1 gold coin to have into your pot for every gold symbol in your village at the end of each build phase. Whoa, that's mental. So if you've just got your founders, but they're still on their gold side, you're going to get 1 coin at the end of each build phase. That's awesome. If you've got 2, like our player on the left here, and they build the captain, You're going to get 2 coins at the end of each build phase. Whoa, that's awesome. The Arkwright triggers off of cards with coins placed on them, so the Arkwright would give you money if you had a Chandler with a coin on it. Whoa, nice. So that's it for profiteering, really. The rest are all fairly self-explanatory, and we don't need to worry about them here. The last thing I'm going to talk about are the Scoundrels and the Saints. The Scoundrels and the Saints are special cards that you'll start your hand with, and you'll have one of each type dealt to you at the beginning of the game. 1 Saint and 1 Scoundrel. Basically, they're just cards that you can keep in your hand and play at a specific time for a bonus. For example, the Barbarian says, discard this card in a draft phase and replace all face-up villagers on the road, and note that this has to be your draft phase. Replace all face-up villagers on the road with villagers from the reserve, and you get all the coins on the road. So the Barbarian basically shows up, kills all the villagers, and takes all of their money, and gives it to you. Once you've used the Barbarian, they are discarded and cannot be used anymore. The Nun triggers during end of game and gives you gold equal to the silver value of a villager that you have only one of in your village. So if you've been making a lot of effort with the solitary cards and you've got a priest here who's going to give you like 12 gold at the end game because somehow you've managed to amass like 8 hats, then the Nun can trigger the priest again, giving you like 24 gold, which is awesome. So you just keep her in your hand and play her at the end of the game. I won't go through every card in the Scoundrels and Saints packs because I'm let you discover them on your own. They're pretty self-explanatory. But I think that's pretty much it for my Villagers Rules rundown. I hope that's been helpful in explaining the game to you so that you can get started playing with your friends. It's actually a very quick game to play, and once you get started, I think that you'll find it flows very easily. So I hope you'll come back tomorrow to join us as I play through it with Michael and Ollie, and we'll find out who's the best at making a village. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do think about subscribing, because it really helps us to produce more content like this and the other stuff that you enjoy. So thanks very much for watching, and see you tomorrow.